Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk for a little bit about Philadelphia. Why Philadelphia? Because Philadelphia is such an important city in the history of the United States. Just think of all of the actions that took place in Philadelphia. If you think of Christ Church in Philadelphia, where Benjamin Franklin did lots of experiments. He was working on lightning rods there. And actually, he set up the lightning rods, and there were wires going from the lightning rod to a series of bells. And during a thunder and lightning storm, the lightning would strike the rod, the wires would be electrified, and the bells would ring, quite often in the middle of the night. He stopped using bells pretty quickly because people wanted to kill him because of that. One has to understand what the whole idea of the lightning rod was about. Now, of course, Franklin understood electricity to a degree. He still had lots of questions about it, but he understood some aspects of it and created much of our terminology about batteries and positive and negative currents and things. That's all from Franklin. I'm not going to get into the kite because I'm dubious over the whole idea of the kite. But the lightning rod is extremely important. Years ago, what they used to do in churches and small communities all over the world is that you had the church bell ringer. And the church bell ringer was always called to the church when there was a thunder and lightning storm coming, when it could be seen. And what he would do is climb up into the steeple and ring the bells like crazy so the voice of God would scare the thunder and lightning away. That usually did not work. And what would happen more often than not, if it was a severe storm, that bell ringer had a good chance of being electrocuted because he's up on the top of a steeple with a bunch of metal bells ringing them, and the lightning would go for what was metal. There was a big shortage of bell ringers, when you think about it. And of course, the lightning rod changes everything. And that was all done at Christ Church, which still exists. And of course, Franklin is buried in Christ Church Cemetery, as is Benjamin Rush, who we don't think about too much. Unfortunately, he's very, very important. And of course, he was involved with the Mint, which is still in Philadelphia. And so much else. Betsy Ross, of dubious claim with the flag, also went to Christ Church. There's a lot of things that are kind of fascinating about Philadelphia. Independence Hall. How amazing is that? Parts of it aren't original. That's what we have to deal with. But the shell of the main building is original. The wings are not. The inside was basically redone. A lot of the materials inside, sadly, were damaged, replaced, destroyed, and a good deal of the interior has been redone with new materials to basically mimic the old. But it's where it happened, and that's what's important. When you go to Carpenter's Hall, that's even more important in many respects, if you think about it. Because that's where the seeds of independence started. That's where the ideas of independence started, where the arguments over the concept of independence and thoughts about it and thoughts of breaking from Great Britain. That's where the First Continental Congress met, and where the Articles of Writs and Grievances was written by John Adams, which was a very important declaration. Somewhat forgotten now. It was overshadowed by the Declaration of Independence, of course. But the writs of grievances is so very, very important in the start on the road to independence. And if you think of Carpenter's Hall itself, that's where Benjamin Franklin created the first lending library. It's where the first bank was before the building, which still exists, which was the first bank. Very important stuff took place at Carpenter's Hall. Across the way was where Benjamin Franklin lived. His house existed till 1812, and then it was torn down by his family. And they built a lot of low-cost housing and buildings and stuff like that to make money. And of course now it's kind of, you have the ghost structure of Franklin's building. But there's so many other structures, so many other places, so much there. And you know, the thing that I find so fascinating about Philadelphia is what happened there. You know, this is where those ideas of independence took place. It's where the concepts of our liberty, of our foundations of government were first thought. It's where we said that we are a free, independent country. That's remarkable. It was Philadelphia, the Declaration of Independence. What a profound document that came from our Congress, written mainly by Thomas Jefferson, who was a remarkable writer, a frighteningly awful speaker. But give him a pen, give him ink, and he was fantastic. But when it came to speaking, he didn't say more than like 2 words in a row in Congress. Benjamin Franklin used to call him the red-headed tombstone, you know. Thing is, that's also rather fascinating, is the museums, the various centers for the arts, the philosophical society, of which many of our founders belonged to. And this is where many of the publishers were located. Philadelphia was a center of publishing. You know, from the mid-18th century right through the 19th century into the 20th, Philadelphia was a center of publishing. You know, there were great magazines published in Philadelphia. You know, come to think of it, think of the American Review that was created by Robert Walsh in 1811. And that was a magazine, the first quarterly magazine in the history of the United States. And that was started in January of 1811. It was a magazine dedicated to history, literature, and politics, and it was steeped in the political situations of the time. And what were the political situations of the time in 1811, 1812? Well, we're on the cusp of going to war, which we would in 1812. And in 1812, the magazine ceased publications. There were some issues there. And then, of course, in 1813, another magazine comes out, a monthly magazine, which is called The Analectic, which was very important and published for years. And who was its editor was Washington Irving. All this was happening in Philadelphia. This was the second capital of the United States. This is where the Articles of Confederation were conceived. This is where the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Writs and Grievances, and of course, the Constitution. And of course, we all know that the Constitution was not exactly planned in 1787. It was supposed to be a gathering to fix the Articles of Confederation. And it was hijacked, which is a fascinating story, which I think I've talked about before. This was where recordings were made by the Victor Talking Machine Company from around 1900 to about 1905. Not far from Independence Hall, I think they're around just about a half mile away. And it's where fantastic art museums are, and where there were great centers of learning and medical research. So much is Philadelphia. And, I love to walk through Philadelphia. I love to walk down the street, and you can't help but feel that history. You can't help but sense these amazing feelings, these senses of wonderment of what happened, these miracles that took place. Think about the absolute wonder of the mouse that roared. I mean, for all intents and purposes, you have to marvel at this. Because we declared independence against the greatest empire in the world, the most powerful army, the most powerful navy in the world, and we had nothing except a dream and some dedicated individuals. And you had the dynamo, John Adams. I don't think we would have had independence without John Adams. He belonged to every committee practically in forming and formulating independence. He pushed Lee to go to Virginia to push for a resolution. He nominated George Washington to be the general. By doing so, he brought Massachusetts and Virginia together, the two ends of the center. And you think about it, in that period of time, the colonies that were considered most important went from Virginia to Massachusetts. That's the way they thought it. They were all important. But in a sense, Philadelphia was the keystone of this gathering of individuals. That's why today Pennsylvania is called the Keystone State, because it was the very center where everything took place. I can't wait to go back and walk around Philadelphia and just feel that history walking with me. Sometimes you walk through there late at night, and it's really interesting. You walk by the graves of Franklin, and you walk by those buildings, and you just sit there and think in the stillness of night. Your imagination just flies, and you think about all of the amazing things that happened and how the entire world changed in one city, one amazing place called Philadelphia. Thank you very much.